If you wanted to know what the worst tank in World of Tanks is right now, according to Tomato.gg, and the worst win rate possible, it's the FE215B, and hopefully you guys are going to be interested to see some replays showcasing that even if it is the worst tank in the game, statistically, that this tank can still be used very, very well, and we're going to showcase two replays, and hopefully you'll enjoy. Now then, our first replay that we have is on Erlenberg, and in the FE215B, or the Tinderbox as I like to call it, this is a vehicle that is basically a kind of fast-firing medium gun, but on a heavy tank that doesn't really have any armour, and is supposed to be a side scraper, but if you side scrape you get punished, which is probably why it's one of the worst win rate tanks, because you can't play it how it was supposed to be designed for. And of course, when you start adding that into World of Tanks with everyone around, yeah, you basically get penned by everything. And yes, you can pen most things, you just aren't competitive by any means against most of the vehicles that you play against. Now, luckily, does manage to bounce the Type 5 hit along with an AMX M454, but don't think that this is the norm. This is actually very rare for the FE215B, and often when you do actually get hit, you get set on fire, hence the name Tinderbox, since the engine is in the front of the vehicle, which basically means most people will just pen you straight through the front and then set you on fire, and then you lose double the hit points that you would have lost just by actually getting hit. Now luckily you can see here actually using the side scrape mechanic, where you can actually avoid the damage since the lower plate is hidden and the side of the tank is actually kind of well hidden as well, and you're able to consistently deal damage using the accuracy of the FE215B. Now hopefully this goes slightly better than you'd expect in a tank like this on a matchup like this with a full tier 10 game. You can see here pinpoint accuracy against the Type 5, hence why we said it's like medium accuracy, and this is really where this game starts to become super fun, and with a tank that is primarily kind of one of the worst in the game. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the worst tank that I would ever play, but statistically maybe it's just a more difficult tank to play, which is why it's kind of skewed, and in fact it's not even close to being the kind of worst tank. It is definitely the worst tank that is statistically in the game. You're over 2% lower than any other tier 10 tank in the game in terms of win rate, 43% win rate average in the FE215B. So if you get one of these on your team, pretty much say it's a loss at that point. So you've got to carry pretty hard in a game like this to be able to come out with a good result. And you can see here up against the Type 5, the AMX here, just trying to put a round into him, but unfortunately for him, it doesn't hit. Whereas with the FE215B, you can see the reload here just pounding its way through the Type 5. Now, unfortunately, the one thing that everybody knows about with the FE215B is that your ammo counter down here, you see there's only 20 rounds left, and there haven't been that many rounds actually fired within this replay. So you can kind of get where I'm coming from, is that you are now maxed at 8,000 damage that you can really do within this replay, and that is if you hit every single shot, because with 20 rounds times 400 alpha, you're looking at 8,000 damage, plus you got some HE rounds, but 9 times out of 10 you probably won't pen with them, since they don't have the best penetration in the... oh no, they do! They're the Hesh rounds, so I completely take that back. I'm a liar. But the Hesh round's 120 pen, so you can pen most things, especially mediums with that, which is kind of a benefit of playing this. But the opportunity to actually use that is probably quite limited anyway, so you know, it's not that big of a deal. But you're seeing here now him moving up into a position to take advantage of the Leopard 1, who's decided he's going into the centre, and unfortunately for him he's having a little bit of trouble coming up and out of the water, and instead he's back in the garage, so he's been swimming his way to the garage. But the Leopard 1 on the enemy team, or the other Leopard 1, decides to try and run. Unfortunately for him, the FE215B doesn't have bot accuracy and is actually able to fling onto him and deal some damage. Now, there you go, the first big old hit hits his tank with the Object 268 on the enemy team, securing 700 damage on him. And this is where this tank can really start to become an awful one. And you can see here him trying to use the armor model of the FV, trying to hide that lower plate, just basically baiting the 268 into shooting him. But you'll actually notice that the cheeks of the FV215B are not particularly amazing either, because what happens is that with significantly high penetration, some of these players will be able to go through this bit here, and obviously on the other side there's the cupola as well, which can be penned. Also you can see this area here from the front, much like for example the VKK or the King Lerva. You can also have this area which people can pen. It's like the turret ring, and this can be an easy pen for a lot of players, especially if they know what they're on about. So yeah, it can be definitely a little bit triggering when people are maybe not bots against you and they just end up penning you every single time. And especially when you think about the tanks with the high alpha in the game, things that are also heavy tanks that just have way better alpha than you, and dealing only 400 damage, although be it consistently, yeah, it can kind of hinder you within the game. So this replay so far, what's actually happened? Well, the team seems to be at a bit of a standstill now. There's been pretty much a rout of the opponent's team. They're up 4,000 damage, so there's no real problem there. Unfortunately, he does actually move backwards into the FV2 4005 shot, which is kind of disappointing. Obviously got confused that he was actually driving backwards rather than forwards, so yeah, a little bit disappointing to see that. But it is what it is, and of course he can now have to try and make up that 1200 hit points that he's just lost to the FE 4005, and he picks up 5900 damage in total so far. And with the projectile on the enemy team pushing out into the open, it's just farming simulator at this point. That's really, really nice, but he does have to be very wary of that FE 4005, and he's trying to get a shot here, just feathering the target, seeing if there's any area that he can hit him. It's not the case at the moment, but maybe he could get some later on. But one thing that you're seeing here is he's trying to do it with the with the projectile as well, and unfortunately not able to get anything. But this is where the FV215B really kind of lacks, is that it cannot be aggressive because it doesn't have the armor. It doesn't have the alpha, so you can't trade with a lot of tanks in the game. In fact, it's very hard to trade with vehicles in the game. And you also don't really have the mobility to push forward and get into a position quick enough to be able to kind of outflank opponents and that sort of stuff, since you can only go about 40 kilometers max if you're really using the turbo and everything like that. Yeah, it's kind of limited in that regard. But you're seeing here him decide that he's not going to push in, he's going to let his team actually go in and spot, since he's on such a low amount of hit points that one shot from the Object 268 on the enemy team, or even just a shot from the Gorilla or the GUI 100 even, it will basically end him. Now luckily the 268 actually gets removed, and he indeed gets some spotting damage on him, which is really, really nice. And actually the FV215B does have fairly good view range. It's nothing like outrageously good, but it can certainly be of an advantage to this tank over maybe some of the Soviet heavy tanks that you see in the game. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, there's no real reason why you would go out of your way to spend bonds on this tank, since it is a bond vehicle. I mean, if you picked it up long before this actually got removed from tier 10, since it used to be a standard tank, yeah, I think that, you know, you'd be pretty disappointed with actually spending your bonds on this tank, since it's just not that good, and unfortunately that is the case. But the enemy team have of course all been removed, and a fairly decent game, 7,354 damage, some mistakes in there against the FE 4005, but at the end of the day a really nice result, considering that this is in a pretty brawly map with a tank that doesn't really have brawling armor. So let's jump into the next replay and see if it can still maintain this high damage as well. So the next replay that we have is of course played by a 3 marked FE215B, and that is a tanker in the name of Raikou148, and he's going to have an outstanding result on Himmelsdorf, playing up against some of the tanks that you probably wouldn't want to play up against in the FE215B, because of the fact that they have just very, very painful guns if they do manage to find your weak points, and that is really a big problem. You can see him utilising the turret armour of the FV215B. He's also hiding the lower plate, as you'd expect, making it difficult for people to pen. But there you go, the first round, as we talked about, into the turret armor of the FV, which is very, very painful. And as soon as people realise this and start doing this, yeah, your armor basically goes to 0, and so it's not fun at all to be hit by the Foch 155, let alone being hit in a position which you have kind of maximised everything you can possibly do with this vehicle. Now, unfortunately for the Type 4 on the enemy team, doesn't really have any chance against the teammates on the corner here, but the ST2 on the enemy team, of course, getting into position, trying to use his turret armor. Not that he has particularly any with that big cupola and the overmatched roof that you can do with a lot of vehicles in the game. If you've got a big caliber, obviously the FV215B can't do that, but you can certainly pen the cupola. The Progetto on the enemy team, obviously trying to come out. This is the tier 9, I think it is, or the tier 8. And unfortunately for the enemy Progetto, he's not going to be able to do a whole lot, and with this vehicle just pounding away at their hit points, it's really coming in quite nicely. Now, unfortunately, the Progetto does know the weak points of this vehicle, and so he's penning him pretty much every time, which is very disappointing. But either way, at this point, he's been able to pick up 5,500 damage and been a real benefit to the team. So even if you got taken out at this point, you'd be relatively happy with how you've performed within the game. Of course, holding back a lot of the opponents on this flank, the banana line, really, really nice. But at this point, his AE Phase 1 decides to side scrape out in front of the ST2, and then he pulls back, and the ST2 is kind of forced to fire at the angled FV215B. The enemy Progetto, who also knows the weak points of this vehicle, and who's been only the real one to actually pen, has been consistently dealing damage, and you can see continually penning the turret, not particularly very fun. The STI trying to fire some heat rounds, and pretty much all of the rounds coming in are heat rounds, and they're just not quite penning, but luckily you're seeing some good marksmanship from FV215B here to be able to deal with a lot of these opponents. But you're seeing already the rounds are starting to run out, only 10 rounds left, and although this has been a fairly quick engagement, you're only 4 minutes into the battle pretty much, or just under 4 minutes, and it's pretty much out of rounds already. And this is one common problem that FV215B players have, and it's why I hate this tank, and it's why I hate the fact that Wargaming ever decide that a balancing feature or a feature of a tank should be that, you know, you can't actually deal any more damage because you've run out of rounds, or that it's such little rounds that the maximum amount of damage that you can deal is just so low. And this is really, really frustrating for a lot of players, as I'm sure both the players that we've showcased in today's video that have marks and who have spent any length of time in the FV have probably understood. So you can see here 7,300 damage has been done with over 5,000 block damage, which is really, really nice as well. The TNH on the enemy team, of course, coming out of his little hidey hole and then gets taken out quite swiftly on the move. And the game is pretty much over. Super, super quick. And when you get yourself into a position like that and you're angling in such a way like that, then yes, this tank can be good. But remember, as soon as you are out in the open, as soon as any of your real hull armor is on display, you just get taken out so quickly. So the FV215B, it can be played well, but it definitely isn't played well by the majority. So hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Of course, let me know what you think about 2 of these replays and what you think about the FV215B in general. Let me know in the comment section down below. And if you want to see any replays, or you want to submit your own replay into the channel, then feel free to do that using the email link in the description. And I hope you see me in the next video. Goodbye.